Thank you, Acting Speaker. I too begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and where also my electorate here in Naarm sits, the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to elders past and present. Sovereignty was never ceded. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I also want to acknowledge and pay respects to the elders of the lands where I was born and where I grew up, the Aranda people of Mbantua, Alice Springs, where I was born, and the Lachi Lachi Ningte Nyeri Nyeri people of the Milawa Mallee, where I grew up. I also pay respects to all First Nations people who are in this room today, including my friend Yorta Yorta woman Sheena Watt from the Upper House. Nungujin, Danka Elamar, thank you for all that you have taught me about history, about culture, about country, and about belonging. Today, this Parliament considers a bill of extraordinary consequence, the Statewide Treaty Bill, a bill that seeks to reshape the relationship between this Parliament, the government, and the First Peoples of Victoria, a bill that holds the potential to deliver truth, justice, and self-determination after more than 2 centuries of dispossession, discrimination, colonisation, and genocide. I feel like it is such a huge honour and a huge privilege to even stand in this Parliament as the bill is introduced and to add some meagre words to a topic that words simply can't do justice to. And when I was writing this speech, I didn't know how I would do justice to this historic moment. And I want to thank Travis Lovett, Europe Justice Commissioner and a proud Karatmara and Gondijmara man, who yesterday gave me some sage advice. He said, speak your own truth and carry the spirit of the ancestors with you. So that's what I'll try and do today. I want to be clear that the Victorian Greens support this bill wholeheartedly. We will vote for it, and we will do so without amendment because treaty is not ours to change or dilute or act like we know what is best to improve it. This treaty bill is the product of years of work led by Aboriginal communities, led by the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria, grounded in deep listening and self-determined decision-making processes involving mob across all of so-called Victoria. Our job now is to listen and to respond. Nearly 10 years ago, I sat in this Parliament as the journey to statewide treaty began with the first legislation. But we all know that the real journey started long before this, with the activists, the elders, the trailblazers, and the mob who over many, many decades have had to fight for what is rightfully theirs and always was rightfully theirs, the right to live in safety, dignity, and prosperity on their own country. Because the sad and distressing truth is that their land was stolen from them. Their children were stolen from them. Their ancestors were massacred. Their language and culture was stolen too. And they were robbed of a prosperous future on their own land. And it's a truth that needs telling, but also a truth that needs rectifying. And it's a difficult truth to face for those of us whose ancestors are the ones who did the dispossessing. But nothing changes the facts, no matter how uncomfortable we find them. The truth can be hard to hear. It doesn't make it any less true. And nothing will erase the pain and suffering, but by learning about the true history of the place that we live in, and then acting on that truth with treaty, we may hope to heal, and then hope to fashion a future that we can truly be proud of. A future where Aboriginal people are rightfully able to determine for themselves what their future will look like. A future where we don't just walk together, Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people alike, but where we genuinely come to celebrate and to appreciate that we live in a place with the oldest continuous culture on earth. And how lucky are we? 65,000, more than 65,000 years of unbroken history and culture right here. And what a generous and gracious gift it is by the First Peoples of this land to invite us to create a future on this land together. And in all honesty, given our history it feels like maybe we have no right to receive such a generous gift, such a generous invitation. But as Travis Lovett reminds us, it is not just a gift, but a responsibility. And it comes with obligations. Obligations to listen, to learn from the past, and then also to act. In speaking my own truth, I am aware that for my own children, 2 of whom are in the gallery today, hi kids, that their good fortune, my good fortune, it didn't come from thin air. Their prosperity today wasn't built on guts and guile alone. I'm aware that their ancestors, mostly Irish Catholics escaping famine, the law, and the oppression of the British Empire, in turn, in many ways, became the oppressors of a new land. That their ancestors on the other side of the family, from England, Scotland, Wales, and elsewhere, who came here seeking a better life, worked and bought land that wasn't actually theirs to buy and own. It was Gunai Kurnai land. It was Gunditjmara land. It was Aboriginal land, and it still is. And I'm aware that when we looked further into their paternal grandparents' family history and found references a few generations back to women keeping the blacks at bay with muskets on the farm in Western Victoria, that this is just the tip of the iceberg of the horrors that happened, the atrocities that were committed on this land that we now call Victoria. But so much of that history was kept hidden. I feel very fortunate, having grown up in the Northern Territory and Northwest Victoria, and with parents who worked in community in the Tiwi Islands and in Mantua, that I received more of an education about our true history than many people of my generation. And I am grateful for the knowledge about culture, history, and country that was shared with me. But what a huge national shame that most people of my generation and older received almost no education at all about it in our schools or in our communities about the true history of this country. And Treaty is our chance to change that. I think it's important to talk about our own family's history and tell the truth about it, but of course my family's story is not the story that really should be centred when it comes to talking about Treaty. Because Treaty is the story of survival of countless generations of First Nations families who have resisted, who have dreamed of and fought for better against all odds. And I want to make sure that some of their stories are captured on the record today. Treaty is the story of those that we may have heard of: William Barrack, William Cooper, Sir Doug Nicholls, legendary activists whose stories are now becoming more well known. They're stories of resistance, of land rights, of activism. But it's also the story of those who are less well known. It's the story of all those who fought for Treaty when it seemed hopeless and unachievable, when it was promised by Bob Hawke at Barunga in 1988 and never delivered, but who continued anyway, even though many of those elders aren't here because they didn't live to see the day. It's also the story of those who are sitting in the chamber today, who carried on the fight from the elders and did see this day. Like the co-chairs of the First Peoples Assembly, Reuben Berg and Nagara Murray, thank you for your incredibly powerful words today. And all those in the First Peoples Assembly who represented your community so faithfully, and including the treaty negotiating team led by Nerita Waite, Indy Clark and Troy McDonald. Dr. Jill Gallagher up there in the chamber, and previous co-chairs of the First Peoples Assembly, Auntie Geraldine Atkinson and Marcus Stewart, whose work paved the ground for the outcome that we have here today. The members of the Treaty Authority. It's a story of the York Justice Commissioners, including Chair Auntie Eleanor Burke and all the other commissioners whose difficult work of truth-telling made Treaty possible. Because the truth-telling is the why, but the Treaty is the what we're going to do now that we know the truth. Treaty is also the story of trailblazing First Nations women, women like Lydia Thorpe, the first First Nations woman to sit in this parliament, who faced ridicule and resistance, but who stood here to tell her mob story anyway. Tashina Watt, my dear friend, we go a long way back, who sits in this parliament today. These women had the courage to step into a role in this colonial parliament despite the hostility they knew would come. But they did it anyway, hoping that their fight would make real change and pave the way for others, and my word, it has. Treaty is also the work of so many mob, young and old, whose names will not appear in Hansard or the history books, but who deserve to know that their contributions led to this point, especially all those who enrolled to vote in the First People's Assembly, one by one, to have their voices heard. And we've heard them loud and clear. It's the work of all the mob who kept the fire of hope burning even in the shadow of the pain of the referendum. Treaty is also the story of the people whose pain and suffering at the hands of the colonial government is immeasurable, like the stolen generations. And yet, despite that, extended out their hands in partnership anyway. We owe them all such a great debt. And I want to talk about a friend of mine, Ian Ham, who I spoke to today about Treaty, and I told him I would mention him in my speech. Ian was stolen from his family at just 3 weeks old. He was raised in a different family. His name was changed. And this was just a few towns over from the Yorta Yorta family that he was born into, but he never knew. Ian told me that he never ever thought that he would live to see the day that Treaty would pass this parliament. And his is just one single example of an experience that happened to countless thousands of others. And the thing is that racist policies and ideologies, they don't just diminish those who are the direct targets, they diminish us all. In the same way, Treaty doesn't just lift up our First Nations communities, it lifts up us all. Ian gave me some beautiful words today to say about Treaty. He says that he remembers exactly where he was at 5 years old when he first saw Neil Armstrong walk on the moon. He said, today feels like that. He said for his community, this is their walking on the moon moment. And people will always remember where they were when Treaty was signed in Victoria. And Treaty, let's remember, isn't just the result of the work of the last few years, but the work of decades and decades of people who dreamed of this day, who worked for this day, who might not be here to witness it, but whose actions and footprints are all over it. And ultimately, Treaty is about belonging. When I think about the incredibly complex question of belonging, I often think about young Ian. My own children will grow up never having to experience the pain and confusion that he and others from the stolen generation did. They will never experience being ripped out of my arms as babies. They will never experience the pain of the physical punishment that was meted out just for speaking their own language, or the spiritual pain of having their own culture dismissed, disparaged, and denied. They will never have their own family history hidden from them, like my best friend at high school who didn't find out that she was Aboriginal until her teenage years because the shame inflicted by racism meant that her family told people that her grandmother was Italian rather than admitting that she was Aboriginal. My children will never know these pains. My children have grown up wanting for very little. But actually, they are lacking something if they live in a country that has not healed and has not dealt with its past. And Treaty is a pathway to this healing, a pathway to all of us truly belonging together in this country with each other, a pathway to making our country whole. And I am reminded by the powerful words in the Uluru Statement from the Heart, which said, "When we have power over our own destiny, our children will flourish. They will walk in two worlds and their culture will be a gift to their country." Their culture is indeed a gift to all Australian children. With the advent of Treaty, my children, all children, get to not just live here, but have real pride in the future that we are creating. And for that, I will be forever grateful. There are those, including some in the chamber today, who oppose this treaty legislation. They say we can get better outcomes for First Nations people without treaty, but this argument is surely rooted in the same paternalistic mindset that has seen us fail to improve outcomes over generations. Treaty is about moving away from governments thinking that they know what's best for First Nations communities, to actually handing back some of the power to community, recognising that they know and have always known what their own communities need to prosper. There are others who will see treaty as an opportunity to use for their own political gain. To these people, I say history will not look kindly on those who put their own personal and political gain ahead of doing what's right to address some of the wrongs of history. And I do not think that it is right to seek to score political points off the backs of those who have shown such generosity towards us all in finding a pathway forward. There will also be those who say statewide treaty doesn't go far enough, that it's not enough, and question the legitimacy of the state to make these arrangements at all, these agreements at all, given the history of this country. And look, these are important questions. But as the preamble to the legislation says, this statewide treaty marks a new beginning. It's just that, a beginning. To enshrine the First Peoples Assembly as a permanent body in law. A body, mind you, that's already been in operation for 6 years and doing a great job. To ensure that there are structures in place to allow First Peoples to determine how they want to manage their own affairs and to hold government accountable for the promises they make through Gulong World. And surely, for those of us who are not mob, when the democratic body of First Nations people, chosen by a self-determined process after 10 years of yarning and working, when they tell us that this treaty is what they want and need, surely it is incumbent upon us to sit down and listen. Treaty doesn't end today, but with the Greens votes in the upper house ensuring passage of the legislation in a few weeks' time, we take the first steps in making history. My fervent hope is that other states and other jurisdictions, from Queensland to WA, as well as our federal government, who have rolled back their own support for treaty or similar processes, will look to Victoria and see the benefits of treaty and change their minds. That they will realise that in doing the right thing for our long-term future far surpasses the political opportunism they seek to exploit in the short term. I want to end my speech with the words of a Gunditjmara storyteller, Richard Franklin, who in 2017, around the time when this treaty process in Victoria was just kicking off, summed up treaty better than I could ever hope to. He said, "A treaty is ultimately about hope. A treaty is a light that shines in the distance, and that light that may help us as a nation to acknowledge the atrocities of the past and plant seeds here in the present for future generations to grow trees, a forest, perhaps even change the cultural tapestry of our nation. Treaty is here, treaty is now, let's get this done."